All right, today we've got Hamilton Souther, and when I think about people that are serving ayahuasca, uh, it's not always white people, but but I think it's become more and more common. Uh, People go down and sit with a tribe or something like that, and then next thing you know, their whole life changes. And so I'm curious what got you to the place where you're running Blue Morpho, which is a retreat center down in it's Peru, correct?
Yeah.
And I've actually been hearing about your retreat center for a long time. I think Aubrey Marcus had mentioned it before, or had done some stuff with you guys before, and you've gotten some attention that way. Uh, yeah, could you just tell us a little bit about what drew you to Peru and to be running Blue Morpho?
Yeah. Well, for me, it's been a lifelong calling. So the calling to go to Peru actually came in my early 20s, about 20 years ago. So the calling came in 2001, and it was clear that I was going to ultimately go down to Peru and see whether or not there was an apprenticeship for me. And so, uh, I was doing trance work and kind of meditations and very visionary kinds of meditations before going, but not plant medicines. And in those meditations, I would get very clear messages about what I should do or where I was, headed, et cetera. And it just became really clear that I was going to be going to Peru. It was like Peru just kept coming up over and over and over again. And so I went to Peru. This was before there was a whole plant medicine scene. This was before ayahuasca was even a known word in most people's minds. Like when I went, most people didn't know what the word meant or was. Um, and I got really guided and directed to a traditional formal apprenticeship in a lineage of practitioners that have been doing this for many, many generations. And so I got introduced to ayahuasca on that first journey down to Peru. I had visions that I would, in the ceremony itself, that I would stay there and that I would be trained. And then from the age of 23 to 25, 26, I was in formal training, and that continued then really to the rest of my life. And I started Blue Morpho as a jungle adventure center. And ultimately, our guests heard about what we were doing with ayahuasca and plant medicines and became more interested in that than the jungle adventure treks that we were offering. And so we naturally moved over into sharing the plant medicine that we were practicing. But when we started, we practiced entirely for locals.
Yeah. Well, the first time I ever heard about ayahuasca was probably, man, maybe 2012 or 2013, and only thanks to the internet. So you found it in 2001, and you said you were 23 then?
Yeah, I just turned 23.
Yeah. So in 2001, I mean, the internet was a baby.
True,
There was nothing
true.
about ayahuasca online. How did you hear about it? Like, hadn't done plant medicine before, but you'd heard about this really strange thing in the jungle.
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't really going for ayahuasca specifically. I was going to look for an apprenticeship in some kind of arts that, I mean, it was very vague the way that I would get the messages about what was coming down the road. Um, I had heard about ayahuasca from one person who had participated in a Colombian ceremony about 10 years before that. And literally the only trip report I got was, whoa, hands of God. Whoa, like that was all I could get. That was it. There was nothing there. And then when I had this sort of spiritual awakening, I started to read books about shamanism. And in those books, there were some firsthand accounts. One particular firsthand account of somebody drinking ayahuasca, and that was literally all I ever knew about it. So it was those two accounts, and then I was down in Peru, traveling around Peru, really like learning about their indigenous healing arts of all different kinds. Down in the Andes, it's different. It's practiced differently than it is in the Altiplano, the high plains that go down into Bolivia. It's different than what you see in the Amazon. It's different than the practices in the mountainous areas of the Amazon compared to what they call the low jungle. So I was really just kind of seeing different kinds of practices and very interested in the anthropological background to it and archaeological background to these incredible sites in Peru. But I wasn't specifically focused on one kind of medicine. It was the actual ayahuasca ceremony that I did that changed all of that, simply because it was the most profound experience of my life until that time.
Yeah. So you got down to Peru, and how long before, between getting down there and actually sitting with the medicine, what was that process like?
Yeah, it was about 2.5 months. I would do a meditation every day to get guidance on what to do the next day, and I was just kind of backpacking around looking for, these people that were supposedly were there, like they were supposedly waiting for me, and that we were going to ultimately engage in something together, and that they were going to some way for reason train me or teach me. Like that was all still pretty vague, and I didn't even really believe in it. It was just kind of always coming up in meditation that this was supposed to happen, or in these trance journeys. And so
So
through
go
that
ahead.
experience, I would just, every day go around, and I would just backpack around. I went down through Cusco, southern Peru, and I would meet these healers along the way, or these shamans, or, medico vegetalistas. They all go by different names. And I would practice with them, and they would show me some things, and I would be guided by the experience.
So I got real curious about this. You're sitting at in your early 20s, and you're doing meditations, and you're feeling called to do this thing. I think a lot of people feel the call to do something like that, and some, maybe not exactly like that, but maybe it's just move to a different city, or something that seems minor, but fear comes up for them, and a lot of people don't really follow that calling, or what I would call is like not following your heart. Uh, what do you think was different about you that caused you to go, okay, I'm gonna tap into these divine messages, and then I'm just gonna follow them?
Well, I think in my case, it was a combination of life events that kind of made this all happen. The first one, it was the year after I'd graduated from the university. And months before I graduated, my mentor died, and the plans that I had going forward vanished with his death. He had invited me to be in business with him and live in a different country. And it was kind of like a whole life had been created, somewhere else. And so that was gone, that vanished in the last couple months before I graduated. And then um, I was I had this sort of like watershed moment that year after, where I gave my life to spirit. I just was kind of over feeling like I was driving it myself, and maybe not driving it very well. So I really did give my life to spirit without even knowing what that could mean or what could come from that kind of a concept. But I handed over what I thought was mine to a greater power. And I didn't even believe in that greater power when I did it. I just did it. And then I started to have the visions after that. And so I couldn't put the genie back in the bottle. I realized I had done something. I didn't know what I had done. I didn't know the ramifications of it. I didn't know if it was good or bad or anything. I mean, I didn't have any way to frame it. Just things started to happen. And then the third thing was that I had an unbelievable amount of skepticism and doubt and fear about doing this. And so I thought, like, most probably I would end up writing about a great failure, like a travel novel. Not that this
Yeah.
would actually turn out into some kind of reality, and I would ultimately live it for the next 20 years of my life. So it actually did turn out. And then I was left with another crisis, like, 70, 80 days into this journey, that I really had now had visions of this apprenticeship. I really was going to stay living in the middle of the Amazon. I was going to have to figure that out. So I think those three things really catalyzed the experience of going down there, and being able to at least give it a shot.
Yeah, can you tell me a little bit more about giving your life to spirit? That's yeah, I've read The Untethered Soul, and what was it, the Surrender Experiment by Michael Singer, and it sounds very similar, just in the way it's kind of like, I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm going to surrender my life to this and see what shows up. What's that? What's the difference between, I'm running the show versus spirits running the show?
I think the biggest difference is that, when you feel like you're running the show, you have this very fixated ego that is both in a state of saying yes and no to everything. Like you're trying to parse and decide how you're managing and thinking and strategizing and analyzing. And for some people, it's like endless chess. It's like endless mind chess. They're just, you know, thinking all the positives and negatives, pros and con lists, how to parse risk and all these different kinds of things that are sort of ego fixations. And I think the mindset is very fixated on the physical. It's very fixated on what's here right now. What are your plans? What are your strategies? How you're going to ultimately achieve, each like step along that way. And I think when you give your life to spirit, you realize that there is something much greater about this universe. To first just start there. Like, it's not just about our own individualized lives. There's a great collective that's taking place, and the earth is very tiny compared to the rest of the universe. And so there's a great universe where there's a lot of things happening, and most of them we don't know, but there is a force associated with that universe that is it's truly universal and all encompassing. When you open up to that, typically you start to have kind of altered state perception that you normally just don't have when you're so fixated in like that normal 3D ego state. And in that, you kind of realize that, again, there's more going on. There's also kind of more direction going on, and you really have to pay attention to the nature of those messages that's coming, or the intuition that you have, or the visionary experience you have, or the dreams that you have, as you're kind of getting information and being guided now in your own experience. I don't think you have to release being rational in any kind of way, or discerning. I think that that's actually the opposite. You have to become incredibly rational and discerning, because you're opening up to what could potentially be also delusional, and so that's not going to be really supportive or helpful. Like, real spirit is real. It's a phenomena, and we're going to study it in the consciousness arts. And delusion is a real phenomena that has been going on for too long of this planet. It's like that. It's a different mindset about how you would think about things. And then I also think there's probably an extraordinary sense of like being protected or guided. And so you might take more risk than you would originally think about doing, like just moving into the Amazon and expecting it all to ultimately work out, even though there's probably like a laundry list of reasons why that wouldn't happen.
Yeah. Did you have anyone discourage you from going to Peru? I think for me and like a lot of people I've worked with, it seems like the people closest to us are sometimes the ones that are, because they love us. They sometimes want they don't want you to experience something they're afraid of. I mean, did you have that experience at all?
A little bit, not mostly from friends. Family was really supportive. I told them about everything that was going on from the moment that it happened. And there was like real cause and effect. So there was enough to think that something real was happening. And it was kind of a phenomenon. Um, Friends didn't get it at all. In fact, I don't have hardly any of those friends anymore. It just kind of fell away as I changed so dramatically. But where the real antagonism came was actually in Peru. I was warned against it going down, like, hey, don't be naive about this. They don't play by the same set of rules. They don't have the same culture, especially the indigenous people or the people who live out, deep in the countryside. Like, they might be mestizo in race, but they really are very indigenous in their mindset about how they think of the world. So be careful about that. So I was warned in that sense. But I wasn't prepared for the amount of antagonism there was, in the sense of there being a true taboo to teaching foreigners. So I didn't realize that I was basically like wanting to go walk into an inner city where there's a gang war going on, and deciding to pony up and become part of that. Like, that was not in my mindset of what was going on here at all. And then I found out that I ended up in that, and everyone was looking at me like, what are you doing, kid? We've spent our time getting away from that, and you're trying to get back into it. Like, you're swimming against the stream here. So that was the real antagonism. And there was a tremendous amount of racism in that it was taboo to allow non-blood lineage relatives into this, sort of into these lineages, both from the indigenous side and from the mestizo side. And through also an incredible series of events, I actually got accepted into a lineage, and then got taken through traditional apprenticeship, befriended an indigenous tribe, became their medicine man, which is completely wild. In my early 20s, I was this entire tribe's medicine man. And through those experiences, kind of fought my way into their culture, and was, finally tolerated/accepted.
What's it mean to be a medicine man inside of a tribe? Like, what's that look like?
Well, the tribes live in the forest, and the forest doesn't have access to Western medicine. And so it really looks like a field doctor. Like, you're there, and whenever there's a problem of any kind, the people just show up at your door. Like, hey, I got a cut. Hey, I broke a wrist. I stepped on a fire ant and now I have an infection. My baby won't nurse. We don't know what's going on. Uh, this older gentleman's delirious. What do we do? And then there's these extraordinary psychosomatic kind of illnesses that you see down there that you don't really see so much in the West. And they kind of go by an entire classification of their own right, which is, wild. Like you see distended bellies and tongue swelling and really weird states, look like very altered states, even though the people are usually sober, like their eyes are rolling back in their head and their tongue's actually like being swallowed, try like it's going the opposite direction down their throat or something. And they're just like, please fix this, like what can you do? And then you're only as good as your ability to fix it. So, what the role is, okay, what do I do? And I think the first thing I learned was, when do you send this to a hospital? And, when do you know the different plants or the different healing practices to actually administer the plant medicine there? So your job really is like that of what would be like pre-Western medicine. I think what was really interesting about it is that they have a belief, like the mythology of the medicine of the forest is that there's a physical medicine, which is like the plants, and there's no difference between making that and creating a pharmaceutical drug. Like there's over 100 pharmaceutical drugs in the market today made from Amazonian plants. So they understand this incredible blend of chemistry, but then they also understand this idea that there's energy involved and it comes from a living source. And they see the forest in this energetic living kind of way. And then they have visionary experiences that open up that living forest belief, very much like the art behind you, like these wild, colorful visions of seeing that actually alive in their lives. And they've woven those three pieces together into this tapestry of plant medicine. And so you're expected to wield that plant medicine and provide healing to the people. I got the role by healing the chief's grandson. And I didn't know that I was healing the chief's grandson. This lady came up in a canoe to my house where I was doing my apprenticeship, and she brought a baby who was sick, and I healed the baby. And the next day, the tribal chiefs came to my house and said, "Well, you healed my grandson. You're now our medicine man."
What did you do for the baby?
Uh, it was an odd case. It was a really interesting experience. I didn't really know what to do. During that period of time, I would go through these experiences where I would feel literally overwhelmed by spirit, like overwhelmed by this extraordinary energy that would come into the room. It wouldn't be there all the time. It would like turn on. And when it did, all the hair on my body would stand on end. It'd feel like this electricity would be there. And when that would happen, I would like hear things and know things that just were spontaneous. I had no control over it. So in this case, the lady, the mom brought me the baby and she was holding it to her chest, and the baby was, you know, somewhere between like 5 and 6 months old and hadn't nursed for a number of days and was very listless and a little swollen and looked very dehydrated and a little feverish and kind of semi-conscious. And there wasn't enough time to take the baby to anywhere. I mean, the baby needed intervention. And so I literally didn't know what to do. And I had that kind of panic moment, like, I don't know what to do. And that thing triggered, whatever that was. I mean, I don't even have a word for it anymore other than just to say like spirit, like this energy would appear. And again, all the hair stood on end and stuff like that. And this very clear direction came, pick up a shakapa, like grab your shakapa. Shakapa is this leaf instrument that's played in the ceremonies. It makes a shook sound, but they use it to interrupt the pattern of energy of someone's body. So they like cut in through the auric field or the energy of someone's body. And that's measurable in science. So, like the fact that it's there isn't like woo woo kind of, thinking. Like there's this energy that we emanate. They start to interject frequency into it in the form of rhythm. And so I did that. And then the voice just said, in last night's ceremony, you learned this Ikaro, use that Ikaro. And it was true. The night before that, I had learned this Ikaro. This being showed up in my vision, and I learned this Ikaro. It's kind of like a chant, and they say chant it into the baby. And so I did. Like it's a common healing technique. And then they said, now use this tree. And then they said, use these angels. And then they said, use this other tree. And just chanting like over the baby. It took about 10 to 15 minutes total before I heard, okay, you're done. And then you blow into the crown of the baby. You blow that energy into their crown. And part of what I needed to do was find the spirit of the baby and put it back in its body. And so I did that. I kind of did every step that I was told. And then I just waited. And in about 30 seconds to a minute, there was this like reaction. And then over the next 10 minutes, the baby went back completely to normal health. Like started giggling, immediately started nursing. Eyes were completely normal again, weren't glassed over. Fever was gone, normal color, like swelling went away within a half an hour. And that was it.
Yeah, I'm curious after having an experience like that. I think about what might happen in the U.S. In the more Western with Western medicine, bring a kid to a doctor with that type of a problem. Um, would these techniques? I mean, sounds like they would work on anybody. Yeah. What's the how do you view what's happening with medicine in the U.S. versus what you've got going on down there?
I think that medicine is it's like a spectrum, right? So depending on how you look at it and how you practice it, there's certain techniques and tools that you'll use that you can explain, and then there's certain techniques and tools that you can't explain. Right? Like my father was a great surgeon, and like he really was an exceptional surgeon, and he told me like we can arrange all the parts, but we don't know how the body grows itself back together. Like we still don't know that. That's what he taught me when I was growing up. And so there was this idea of what was known in medicine and what was still the unknown. And so I think if you're open to the unknown, and then you're also open to um, traditional practices, but I think those traditional practices have to have an efficacy that is repeatable, like Western medicine. Western medicine isn't perfect. The pills don't work all the time. Some side effects are worse for others. There's an efficacy rate when something goes through FDA certification, and approval of how effective it has to be. I think we have to have exactly that same concept for traditional medicine for it to have scientific merit and backing behind it. And it turns out that there are some illnesses that we have that we still don't really understand in Western medicine, especially psychosomatic ones, where the psychology of the brain is actually affecting the body into a physical manifestation that can be very strongly affected by these traditional healing techniques. And the way I look at it is that the traditional medicine was discovered over 10,000, 20,000, 30,000 years of tribes living without Western medicine, without any kind of that form of thought, and having to take care of all the medical problems that their lineages and their community had. So some things they would be very effective with the tools that they have, and some things they wouldn't be effective with. And over time, they've perfected that to the best ability they have. And if you could actually bring science to it, you could increase the efficacy almost endlessly. Like if we could bring now AI modeling to the traditional medicine practices and their use of medicinal plants, and really understand what's going on chemically with the medicinal plants and energetically at the same time, you'd have a much more robust and much more interesting kind of spectrum to work with. But I think you could also bring a lot of these techniques into something like the United States and have a tremendous amount of positive effect. One of the things that they talk about is treating the spirit after treating the physical illness. And we don't do that with kids, and that ends up becoming trauma. And then we try to figure out how to deal with trauma, in their teenage years, 20s, 30s, 40s, where it starts to really appear. Well, they don't do that in the Amazon. In the Amazon, they treat the trauma when it's still fresh. And then they don't ultimately have down the road that sort of, manifestation of trauma, like I said, 20, 30, 40 years later.
So you're saying there's a physical trauma, maybe there's a broken bone, or I fall off a fence or out of a tree and I get hurt, and there's a I'm witnessing a physical healing, but there's never an energetic approach to the healing.
Yeah, or what to do for the inside you. Like
Yeah.
what was the psychological effect on you for that?
Hmm.
What's the psychological effect on a child who breaks their leg and then, they're like kindergarten age and they can't play for 6 weeks or something like that in a cast. In the Amazon, they would treat the leg, and they would also treat the child for whatever emotional trauma there was associated with breaking their leg. It's sort of like they think of it as like an internal fright that gets created to just existing or being alive, and they have a
Yeah.
word for it. So it's like instead of being fully courageous and loving life, and we kind of shy away from, we start to think life is dangerous, and we start to think life's scary. And We start even questioning why we're alive and stuff like that. They would flip that entire argument to, we have to heal that so that you feel courageous again, and you feel spontaneous again, and you feel, fully trusting of this experience that we're all part of.
Yeah, that's well, I want to get into ayahuasca because I um talk more about that than just general medicine. And my first experience with ayahuasca was an incredible amount of unpacking of trauma.
Hmm.
it was it was like, oh, there's all this stuff from 5 years old and previous that we have to look at, that just got packed away. And that was so, as I'm hearing what you're saying, is a lot of people who've never treated uh, uh, the psychology or the energetic body. Uh, they may have a lot of unpacking to do. I guess the older we get, we just start accumulate all these little, we get capital T traumas and some micro traumas.
Oh, for sure. I think that's a common experience in ayahuasca for sure. When you get in there, and I don't know, I mean, there's like, I try to describe it sort of like pulling the psyche apart, like taffy. It just starts to come apart, and like, like the timeline is both macro and micro at the same time. And you go in there, it's like you can zoom in into an experience, and you can zoom out, and you can see all of it at the same time. And there's an unbelievable amount of trauma that we hold on to that we don't even know psychologically is in there. It's like buried in our unconscious, or even like deeper than the subconscious. It's affecting us. And purging that is, I mean, I think it's an unbelievable gift, and something that's quite miraculous, that you can actually purge out the energy associated with it and have a psychological transformation and come up feeling better on the other side. But I also think it's incredible that you can actually release all of that in these ceremonies and receive the benefit from it.
A lot of people, when I talk to people who have not done ayahuasca, one of their biggest fears is, I don't want to throw up, or I don't want to shit myself. And yeah, can you speak to that?
Yeah, I think that we all share that same, fear. And the throwing up part, I think, is it's part and parcel of how we've treated vomiting in general. You know, Usually we think of it as, I'm sick, I have the flu, or I drink too much alcohol. I think probably one of the most common reasons in the Western world. And now, because of that, I'm throwing up, and it doesn't really seem to have like a real purpose to it, other than evacuating something from the stomach. And so we have this like really negative connotation associated with it. In the case of ayahuasca, it's not like you're just throwing up ayahuasca and you've been somehow poisoned or something like that, but rather you're throwing up something that's extraordinary, and they call it a purge. And it's a phenomena associated with this. And I think it just needs to be welcomed. If you have something in you that needs to come out, this is quite a miraculous way for it to be able to come out. And so I just think you embrace that aspect of it. You just say, okay, well, I might throw up. I've found that the experience of it is not like anything like throwing up, drinking too much alcohol, or eating poisoned food, or being sick with the flu. It's some other extraordinary process that starts to come on after you get over the part where there's nausea and you're going to throw up. But the actual experience itself is quite liberating. Um, you do feel like something bad is coming out of you, like something that you really don't need there. There's typically, for most people, including me, an extraordinary psychological awareness about what it's associated with. So
Yeah.
whether that's past traumas, or whether that's just energy that's been accumulating over the last months, or there's some kind of release associated with it that's really powerful. So I embrace that aspect of it. And then on the part about potentially, you know, pooping yourself, I just think, I mean, what I always tell people is, in our ceremonial house, we have a lot of toilets. So like there's a lot. There's enough for everybody who needs one at any given time. And so you want to head to the toilet like very early in that experience. Like, don't wait until it's a crisis. Like, if you're starting to feel it go through your guts, it's like, even if you need help going there, get to the toilet and then just sit there for a while, like get comfortable, and get ready for this like incredible transformation that's going to happen. Because when the guts evacuate, something amazing happens for the body and the mind. Like the idea that there's a mind or a brain in your guts, like it again, this is not just this thing gave me diarrhea. Something extraordinary is being processed and is coming out, and it comes out in a true cleanse. And it's a physical cleanse, but it's a mental, emotional cleanse. It's a psychological, spiritual cleanse. And I haven't found anything else that removes that from you in that way. And so, if you're on a toilet and it's comfortable in that sense, like, it's familiar, and you're about ready to do that, just embrace it and just let it come out, because you're being cleansed by the plants. And that's ultimately why you drink them.
Yeah, that's one of the biggest differences I've noticed with ayahuasca specifically is, people say, well, it's a psychedelic, and I go, well, it. I almost don't feel like it's fair to call it that because there is such a physical component. My first and second ceremony, there was so much purging and things were. It was very obvious that there was something in my lower gut that needed to move it. It was like there were these bricks in there that it had become normal for that to be there, and then as it moved out, I was I was witnessing stories about my past, things that I was realizing as it was happening that that was a traumatic experience, and then when the energy left my mouth and went into a bucket, uh, I was free of it, and there was, the memory was still there. I would say the memory was even stronger, but my relationship to it was very peaceful. And one of the benefits I noticed the very next day is I did a little bit of yoga, and then all of a sudden my hips were more flexible than I could ever remember. I had never been so flexible in my hips, and that flexibility remained probably because I maintained a physical practice. I think that's one of the things a lot of people miss out on is sometimes they do some of these medicines get some physical freedom and then don't do anything to maintain that. What do you think about that?
I think you have to develop the implementation of these transformations. Like, I think a lot of the problems that we have in our life come from just becoming fixated. And, this very cyclical routine gets formed of what we do in the morning, what we do in the afternoon, what we do at night. And, maybe different days of the week, you have different kinds of activities that you kind of do on a regular basis. But that creates this tremendous amount of fixation. Now you go into this ceremony, you have this, massive opening, you get all of these realizations, you've created this physical change. If you go right back to that same cyclical environment and relationship and activities you did before, you're just going to recreate it all, right? It's not like this is some great mystery. So I think what the ceremonies do is they give you an opportunity to make change, and you can do it in a very intention focused, very conscious way. So you get these realizations, like, wow, you've had this hip opening, you've had this greater flexibility, you need to maintain it, you need to maintain it with a practice. It might even come with the gumption to actually do a practice and keep that practice going, or the discipline to do it as well. And so I think you have to make those changes for this to have real lasting effect on life. But I think the really amazing thing is that it gives you that opportunity. It seems like it's so hard to get that opportunity to break the fixations, break the cyclical patterns, and then get a chance to interject something new in it. Uh, this makes it very easy to be able to do that. And so I think that that's one of its, core components, and then something that we have to do in our own personal responsibility afterwards to get the lasting benefit.
Yeah, and what we're getting into here is the conversation of integration. What's your approach to integration? Someone comes, they sit with the medicine. Maybe they sit with the medicine for their first time, and they go, "Okay, great. I had an amazing experience. I'm experiencing more peace and freedom in myself, and I'm hopeful, and I'm ready to make. I see the changes I need to make, and I want to make them. And in a few days, I'm going to hop on a plane and go home. Like, what do you do?"
Well, I think integration starts with your own intentions. And so you have to make a decision for yourself how much that experience really meant to you and what you want to get out of it. I personally think you should get out of it as much as you possibly can. It maybe wasn't that easy of an experience, right? And so you put a lot into the experience. So keep that going and give it a lot of respect. And so I think the first thing that you do is you put it in the forefront of your mindset and understanding that it was a very important experience, a very deep sacred experience, and you're going to maintain that by starting to make some changes in your life that are going to be helpful to you. So you need to give a little time to this. And the second thing that I would do as part of that is to take a couple minutes every morning and every evening and dedicate it to yourself and your relationship you have with yourself about the experience that you had. So maybe that's just tapping more into the heart, or just doing a grounding exercise for 2 or 3 minutes, or just breathing, or just letting yourself lie down on the floor. I don't think it really matters, but it's just, this was a big experience. I'm going to let this settle inside of me, and I'm going to connect to the experience and my intentions that I have. And now it's my responsibility to keep this going. So I'm going to just connect. So there's that first piece is connection. And then um, I think that that all the integration comes from making new choices. And so I think we have to think, okay, I had an experience. From the experience, what do I need to change in my life to be able to fulfill the intention and continue to improve my life? Maybe it's really simple. Maybe it's spend more time with my kids. Okay, we'll start to schedule it. Like, start to get it in the calendar. Start to move other things around. Maybe it's have some difficult conversations. Well, get prepared for those conversations and have them. Don't put that off for 2 months, 3 months, 4 months out of fear. Like, deal with the fear in that time of connecting. Ask for help and support from the plants to be able to have those conversations. It could be, around honesty, that you need to get more honest with yourself. Well, take 2 or 3 minutes a day to be honest with yourself. Go into a meditative space and just tell yourself the truth. No matter how rough it is to hear that truth from yourself, like, just do it. Like, look in the mirror and just tell yourself the truth 100% across the board. There's an aspect of the ceremonies that you need to integrate between the heart and the brain. And the brain wants to be really dominant. And so I think there's some time just to spend with the heart. You can do that in the shower. Like, it takes 10 seconds, 15 seconds just to breathe into your own heart, become mentally aware of it. I think that's really powerful. If you get the message that you need a practice, like developing a yogic practice or a meditative practice, you start and you break it down into bite-sized pieces so that you can actually, continue with it and fulfill it. If you need mentoring or coaching, ask the spirit, ask the energy to help you find the right coach. Like, there are integration coaches now. I'm an integration coach. You coach, lots of people coach now to help people understand, to get that support that they need. So get that support for, and get that kind of coaching. But I think if you look at all of this, it's all about taking that experience seriously. It's not treating it like I had a drug trip and some magical thing's supposed to happen, but rather I had this like very sacred experience that allowed me to open my mind and allowed me to break fixations, allowed me to cleanse and get past blockages. And now I have the opportunity to start to, exercise my mind, exercise my heart, exercise my body, exercise my spirit. And we're going to use exercises to do that. And I think all the ones that I work with are all based on focus and intention. And I live a very busy Western life. And so I break it into very small bite-sized pieces because I don't have 4 hours a day or 3 hours a day to dedicate to this. So I do it, 3, 4, 5 times a day to stay connected. And I encourage the process. Like, I don't think integration is I go back and integrate into my normal life. I encourage the process of change in my normal life. And I encourage the ceremonies to continue to work and the medicine experiences to continue bringing change into my life. And I think that is integration. And then ultimately, like 3 months, 4 months, 5 months, 6 months down the road, you look back on it and you say, wow, I'm living what was my dream. Right? I've actually implemented all of these things. I've integrated and implemented all of these things into my life. I'm healthier in my mind. I'm healthier in my body. I have better relationships. I'm doing better financially. I'm making better choices and decisions. Like, I have better mentors. I'm doing better in my career. I have better working relationships. And that's because you like literally went through them and improved them all, little by little.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm a big fan of frequency in order to get there. Is how frequently are you doing those check-ins like you talked about? And that seems to be the thing that causes one person to have an experience in ceremony and then be disappointed in the results, and someone else sits in ceremony and you know they they got everything they wanted and more out of it, and their ability to frequently revisit what they need to revisit in order to get there is really really important. For so let's say the jungles of Peru, are all medicine men serving ayahuasca, or is being an ayahuasquero? Do you need also be a medicine man that's doing other things? Like, what's that relationship like?
Yeah. So there's like just like Western medicine, there's a wide variety of practitioners. And in the Amazon, where there's a ton of plants, they're typically known by the plants that they use. Although there are some just like pure spiritual workers that don't use plants, but most of the time people are dominated by the plants, and that sort of defines their practices. So your ayahuasca is your ayahuasquero, your tree specialist is a palero, a sanango specialist is sananguero, a mapacho tobacco specialist is a mapachero, a toe specialist is a toero, a camalonga, camalongero, etc. Some mix and match. Some are fixated only in one practice, like that's their specialty. I was trained in like core 5 different specialties and a 6th kind of on the side. So, in our lineage, it was lots of different kinds of plants that we worked with and kind of mixed and matched those different practices together. I don't think one is specifically better than the other. There's no way to really cross compare. It's just you learn different things from different plants, and they can be used also to heal illness or treat illness in a different way. So, like the ayahuasca is really all about the psyche. And you can heal some physical things with it, but not really as many as you can say with like the trees. The tree dietas are used to heal all sorts of kinds of physical ailments, including things that would just be thought to be untreatable. And so you go into a kind of dieta, you go on this fast, you eat a very limited amount of calories, you drink different parts of the trees from their roots to their barks to their leaves. Depending on the kind of trees you're working with, you drink them for different frequencies. And over 9 days or 15 days or 30 days, healing takes place and the body regenerates in ways that is really remarkable. So, you have different kind of specialties, and then people get into it for obviously different reasons. There's this psychological, psychosomatic component, visionary component to the visionary medicines that is both very enthralling and like draws people into it, but it also is the same thing that ultimately gets them to not be interested in it. It can just be so intense, and so you will find that like there's a whole kind of subset of people that are ayahuasqueros, and they're kind of in their own thing, because they're fundamentally into this like really altered experience, and they drink ayahuasca while they practice. So
Yeah, yeah. So one of the things that really the more I think about it, the more it trips me out is the ayahuasca is a vine and a leaf, and it's brewed for what, about 24 hours? Is that right? And just the idea that when you think about the people who've been using this for, I mean, as far as we know, thousands of years, maybe 10,000 plus years, we don't know. I mean, if you read any Graham Hancock or Randall Carlson, their work, you start going, well, everything's way older and things have been pretty advanced before, and it gets, again, a whole other trippy conversation. But the idea that people discovered, oh, I'm going to take this vine over here and this leaf over here, and then I'm going to mix the two together, but it needs to be cooked at up to at least a certain temperature for a certain period of time, and then we're going to drink it. And then, like, how does that discovery happen? It just trips me out.
yeah, I don't know either. I mean, no one really knows, right? That's part of the mystery of this, is the origin of these plants. And in the case of ayahuasca, I agree. I mean, you have two completely unrelated plants. They don't really even grow near each other typically. One grows in the shade and one grows in the total sun. Ayahuasca is in the sun and chacruna needs to be in the shade. You use the vine and it has to be of a certain age. And you have to, use the leaves of the chacruna tree to be able to ultimately make this concoction. And then I know that the information spreads quickly, through trade and stuff like that, but it is also used like over a huge area of the world. Like the Amazon basin is massive. And it's used in what would be for us a number of different countries, which back then was just a huge area of forest. And the ultimate origin, I don't know. There's a mythology in our lineage that says that there was a time way in the past. This is how it's described. They say way in the past, there was a time when humans, animals, and plants all spoke a common language. They had their own individual language, but they also had a common language. Now, I personally think it's like a field of consciousness. I don't think it's a language like, the
Hmm.
alphabet turned into syllables, turned into words. I think this is like a visionary state that everyone's in, that they're kind of like, and I think from there, that's what they call spirit. Like when you're tapped in like that, what is a jaguar? It's not exactly the same thing as you see like walking around in the forest. It's similar, but it's not exactly the same thing, right? Or like, what is a tree? Well, the tree plus its like energy and its growing and its connection to the ground and the mycelium networks and all the nutrients that's going through it. It's a really animated thing, right? It's like this very psychedelic thing that we just normally don't see with the normal reflection of our eyes. So they say like, okay, there's this time where there's this common language, and it was during that time that the knowledge was shared, and that the plants taught the people, and the people taught everybody, and the animals were part of it. And that's as good as we have. And if that's true, that's an amazing thing, and a technology and language that we need to somehow revive. We need to somehow get that known again. And if it isn't true, then it just adds more to the mystery.
So, uh, I told you before we got on the show, I lied. I told you I was going to start with this question, but now I'm going to ask it now, 45 minutes in. But yeah, what is the difference? And it sounds like your first experience with plant medicines, visionary plant medicines, was ayahuasca. I don't know if you've had other experiences with other plants or not, but what do you see as the difference between ayahuasca and a lot of the other psychedelic medicines out there?
So my very first like plant medicine ceremonial experience was with Wachuma, San Pedro,
Mm,
and I did one of those, and then I did ended up in ayahuasca. So that was an incredible experience in its own right too. I think each plant is incredibly unique. It's like truly incredibly unique. So it's hard for me to, in the Western sense, of put them all in this group called psychedelics because they're so unique. So maybe there's
yeah.
like a common component that would make them that, but that's like the 1% part that they're sharing, and it's like 99% different. So I've had experiences now with most of, I think, the visionary plants, with the exception of ibogaine, and I think that like the onset's completely different. Like Wachuma San Pedro can take 4 hours, 5 hours before it really starts to kick in. Um, Psilocybin is, you know, very mental. Like it'll
Hmm.
create this body experience, but it's really about this mental transformation, and it is activating for the brain. Like there's so many different healing potentials associated with it. It's mind boggling. Um, you have to be very careful with it in terms of the visions and what you think you're receiving, because it's very easy to slip into delusion. Um,
Yeah. What? Yeah. How do you have discernment with that? Because I've witnessed both. Um, I I've been very fortunate. For some reason, I've been able to maintain a lot of grounding uh, from my first experiences on my own with mushrooms, all the way through ayahuasca and 5-MeO and things like that. My ability to ground back in is um, on a pretty intuitive. But I've witnessed a lot of other people fall into delusion and go, oh, I was shown that I was supposed to do this, but it's like a vision of grandeur, and maybe they were supposed to do that, and they failed to execute. Um, you know, so yeah, what do you? How do you help people discern between delusion and following spirit?
I think that it's all about how you start the intention. It's not about how you can, control that in the experience itself. It's where you're coming from. And there's a focal point, which can be, we're not about delusion. Like everybody has some amount of just false belief or assumption in them,
Right.
right? Everybody believes things that aren't true. You wake up from it over time. Is the practice about waking up from that, or is the practice about feeding that? If
Mm,
you don't make that a focal point of your intention to wake up from the delusion that you already have, you're going to ultimately go into more delusion. And I think it's actually a real problem that's awaiting for the psychedelic renaissance that is not really understood. And it's one of the things, and one of the main reasons of why we're creating the Blue Morpho Academy, to actually teach courses around how to approach the sacred plants and to understand it, because we have false beliefs societally. We have false beliefs, so it's not
right.
like it's not on anybody, right? It's like, unfortunately, we don't have just fact-based information out there, and so that can lead to greater and greater delusion, like you said, these ideas of grandeur that may or may not manifest. So I think there needs to be like a healthy amount of skepticism. There needs to be the focus on like really clear intention that we're moving through delusion, not going deeper into it. We're asking the plants to remove delusion from us and to awaken us to something that is much more truthful. And then we have to have tribe around us. We have to have our own community and our own inner circle that we're trusting with enough to be able to discuss these conversations and these experiences. And then, find out whether or not they're delusion or not amongst all of us together, because it can be very hard to discern what's going on. And a lot of people will become very defensive of the experience. They'll like say, no, I'll show you. And then you're like, no, I'm really here for your best, your well-being. You're like my brother, you're my friend. I swear 100 people have felt this way. They've come out of a mushroom trip, or they've come out of ayahuasca, and they've had this experience. We need that commonality to become like an encyclopedia. We need to have a list of all the things that can be delusion. And a person could be that one out of a million that isn't, and that's their vision, and it's going to come true. But for most of us, I think we need to stay really level-headed in this exploration.
Yeah, I've thought about it like this. We take somebody who's raised as an American in the U.S., and then they go and have a plant medicine experience in Peru. So my first experience was in Peru, and uh, it was such a dramatic. Even though I had experience with mushrooms, MDMA, LSD, and I go down to Peru, Wachuma. I had that, and then a few days later started ayahuasca, and it was such a dramatic psychological shift that nothing else really prepared me for that. Is the Western mind suited for uh, that medicine? I mean, I know for a lot of us it is, but for a lot of people, I almost feel wary. They're like, "Oh, should I do it?" I'm like, "Man, I don't know. You could be, are there psychotic breaks with people? Or is it not beneficial for some people?"
I think it's a really good question, and the answer is yes. Across the board, yes. So, first of all of the psychedelics that I know of, with the exception of ibogaine, ayahuasca is the one that you need to be most critical about in terms of screening
Hmm.
yourself and people you would allow into the sessions.
Hmm.
Um, there needs to be medical screening. There's contraindications with other kinds of substances, other kinds of pharmaceutical drugs, etc. There's a lot of behavioral restrictions to ensure your safety, and you need to agree to those going in. Like you have to agree to wear your seatbelt. You might not like it, but you need to agree to it, right? There's no law about this that's saying you have to do it this way or that way, but there's a tremendous amount of understanding about how to do this in a safe way. So you need that agreement that you're going to follow the rules associated with safe practice. Then, if you have family history associated with psychotic episodes, these kinds of experiences can trigger them. It can actually like kick it off. It doesn't mean you had to have one before, especially if you're in your late 20s to early 30s. And that age bracket of like 27, 28 to 35 is a period of time where if you have that in you, it's like, in your medical history, family history of having psychotic episodes, these kinds of experiences can actually trigger that and awaken that in your brain. And it's like an awakening of a certain kind of like latent brain chemistry. And obviously that's an incredible negative. So you're not a candidate to participate specifically in ayahuasca. There might be other visionary plants that you could work with, but like maybe wachuma is safer in that sense. But ayahuasca is a no, and that's a hard no, and you need to accept that. um, the plants have to have our use of the plants have to have a common understanding of what's safe and what's not safe, right? Like if you have drug allergies, you're not supposed to take those drugs. Like if you have food allergies, you're not supposed to eat those foods. And so, yes, it can cause psychotic breaks. There's also an experience in the ceremony itself where you can experience psychosis, and that's different than like a true psychotic break. But you can go into an extremely extended state of consciousness that looks very crazy on the outside. And you can come back from it. I mean, it's very, very, you're
I've
stretching the
witnessed
rubber,
this.
right? This is very pliable, right? And 4 hours later, the person's like, "What? Wait, that was awesome!" Like, and everyone else in the room's going like, "No, no, that was not awesome. Like, we're traumatized now from having lived through you doing that, dude." So,
Uh,
in understanding that, there's you got to understand that these can create wildly vast experiences of psychological states, and it doesn't mean that you're going to be in that state forever. You can come out of it, your brain chemistry can normalize. You need to understand your sensitivity. Just because you go and work with indigenous people, it doesn't mean that they're using Western dosing on you. That's the other thing. Like the ayahuasca cultures I was introduced to were hero doses. There was nothing
yeah.
else. Like they would tell me, an 8-year-old drinks or an 80-year-old drinks, and they're getting a full cup. And like I ended up finding out that I think like around 1/16 to 1/20 of a full cup for most people is full send, like
Whoa.
full 10 out of 10 visions, like for most people. And then you find like, 1 in 30, 1 in 40, they need actually more ayahuasca. But most people go fully visionary on a couple tablespoons of strong ayahuasca, not 6 ounces, as the way it's typically poured in traditional settings. And so dose becomes an unbelievable, huge aspect of this. You hear a ton about it in the use of, other psychedelics, especially around like mushrooms. It's broken down into grams and kind of the strength of the strains. And, you hear like golden teachers are kind of like this and penis envy's kind of like that. And, be careful and whatever. There's a little bit more about it. And the dosing around ayahuasca is really kind of in the hands of the facilitators or the shamans. And so it doesn't really get talked about as much. But I think it's a really key component. If you have psychological instability, you need to be aware of that and test going into ayahuasca on, like, the first night, second night, what a smaller dose actually does for you. And many people find that that's actually plenty.
Yeah. How do you guys run? Someone comes down to your retreat center. What does that experience look like?
Well, it starts with an online application, and we reserve the right to tell you that you're not a good candidate for this, and then tell you it's just not feasible. But then we walk you through a medical questionnaire to understand, your own medical history and to understand better how we can help you and serve you. And then, you know, we send you a ton of information before coming about, how to prepare and what to bring and everything like that. And then we organize the group. The group's typically 15 to 25 people. Sometimes it's a little bigger, sometimes it's a little smaller. And we go out to a lodge. Right now we're using Heliconia Lodge. I have my own lodge that I built. We're actually going to convert that lodge into a center for dieta and for long-term healing and for studies. And so it's going to become one of the Blue Morpho Academy's campuses. But we go out to this lodge. It's incredible. We have a purpose-built ceremonial house there. It's really massive. I like to have people have like some space. You'll see some houses where everyone's like really packed in. I really like it that everyone has a little space and it makes moving around a little bit easier. So, we have this massive ceremonial house. And for those concerned about like the physical aspects of it, we have, I think 12 toilets, and there are 12 toilets in the ceremonial house. So there's plenty.
Perfect.
And yeah, and showers, there are 4 showers. I mean, there's sinks, there's everything you would need, right, to be able to stay clean and be comfortable. And then we go through an orientation. I prepare you for what to expect and how we're going to go through it. And then I guide people through a really consistent, repeatable arc of sessions. So we go through ceremony 1, that's an introduction. Ceremony 2 is a deepening. Ceremony 3 is the culmination of your healing. And ceremony 4 is kind of putting it all together into this, great opening of incredible amount of love and light and source. And so it's very consistent, so that, we introduce the plants from the psychiatric side of it very gently over time. And we also get you accustomed to what it's like to be in that experience. Um, I like to have the room be very quiet. Like, this is a very deep inward experience. It's about holding space for others. And so I share with everybody how we build the container together. And it's not just I'm there to hold the container, but we're all going to hold the container. And so I teach everybody how we're going to do that. And ultimately, everyone's a participant in, their own experience, but also helping be responsible for how that ceremonial center's energy works for everybody else as well. So there's a tremendous amount of education and coaching that goes along throughout each day. And then there's one-on-one time with people to understand their own experiences and group conversation to be able to, go over what's going on. And then we do, we do 2 sessions on the first 2 nights. So night 1 and night 2, we have session. And then we have a break. And it's really important to have that rest time. It's a cumulative process. And so the body actually processes an unbelievable amount of energy. And so then we go into ceremony 3 and 4, and we do those on successive nights. And then that's the end of the retreat. We find that 4 ceremonies is enough for everybody. There are some places that do 2, 3. There are some places that do 8, 9, 10. We found 4 is the magic number. That's the sweet spot in terms of having enough opportunities to get enough out of it, but also having it be contained enough and in an amount of time to then make integration easier. And so we've actually found that people get more out of it doing 4 ceremonies.
Yeah. Yeah. Most of my ceremonies have been four at a time. And it does seem like that arc you were talking about. Always talk about, the first one. I like my first one to be a handshake. It's like, okay,
Mm-hmm.
hey. And then the second one is like, okay, like we're going deep. And then the third one always, for not always for me, but sometimes it feels like the door's getting kicked in on me. And, and the fourth one's like a loving hug. It's like, okay, okay, we're done. I'm gonna go integrate this into my life now. Thank you. Yeah. Yeah. Beautiful.
That's beautiful. Yeah, I think that there's, this idea of that door getting kicked in, right? Like there's a part of us that has to surrender to the experience, and there's a part of us that has to accept the medicine taking us deeper than where we might feel comfortable,
Mm-hmm.
you know? And also a surrendering of aspects of our ego that just aren't serving us anymore. People talk about having this ego death experience. And I tell them it's not about ego death. It's about letting aspects of your ego go that that aren't just sharp tools anymore. Like maybe that worked when we were a teenager to have that attitude, but it doesn't help now. Or maybe that mindset back in like a more warrior period of time really worked to be fighter, but it doesn't work now in that same. So this has to like change. Or the single me versus now the married me has to have a different attitude as well. And then a different aspect of ego needs to flourish and actually be like a blossoming, not holding on to those other negative parts. And unfortunately about ego, it seems like there's a quality to it where we all hold on a little bit to the parts that aren't really serving us, and then things get a little strong in there. it makes us it makes us have to let certain things go.
Yeah. Well, I call them strategies of success. It's
Hmm.
you've figured out a strategy. This is how you approach life, and it works. But it's not working anymore. But you've been doing it for so long, you don't even recognize that you're doing it and that it's not working. And that strategy has to shift. And a lot of times, it's really obvious to the people around you, but com- we can be completely oblivious. And just being confronted with that and saying, "Oh, we need to put a new strategy. Let that strategy go." And letting go of the old strategy can be difficult because there's so many benefits we got from it. It
Hmm.
allowed us to feel safe in some way, and which allowed us to survive. And yeah, it's this medicine is really powerful for that. I want to ask you about. So we talked about your retreat center, but I want to hear about. You got 2 other things you mentioned before the show. One is a book, and then also training for. Would you call it sitters or
Yeah, for sitters and coaches
sitters and
and
coaches?
facilitators and practitioners. Yeah.
Yeah.
So sure, the book we just published is The Mystical Secrets of Ayahuasca. It's part 2 of the story of my apprenticeship, and it really teaches 2 main teachings that I got from Julio Llerena Pinedo, the master shaman who was the head of my training. And it was, how to never give up and how to stay the course through everything that you have to get through anything that's difficult and challenging in life, and also over an extended period of time, especially when you don't know what the outcome of that would be. And so it teaches that lesson, and then how to follow the path of heart that you also mentioned, you know, earlier, and how you actually do that in the medicine, and how you find your heart, and how that guides you and really becomes the source of your intention, and how these, you know, these practices, I mean, it's told through stories of what I went through to ultimately learn those lessons, but it's applicable knowledge for you to understand in your own life how, you know, these kinds of overarching concepts can be very powerful for you and help you, you know, in your own path and ultimately achieve your own mission and, you know, your own life purpose. And so that's the book. We just published it. I'm excited to put it out into the world. It's many years in the coming, and I really hope people enjoy it. So, you know, you can
Can
find
we
it
get
on
that on
Amazon.
Amazon? Where do we find that?
Yeah, you can find it on Amazon. Just you can Google my name, Hamilton Souther, or The Mystical Secrets of Ayahuasca. And it really is about the mysticism that sits behind it. It's not just about the, you know, the plants and the visionary experiences people have, but how the teachings come through it and how those are then applied in our everyday life. And so I think it's a, you know, real applicable knowledge for the people who read the book. And then the second thing we're doing right now is we're creating the Blue Morpho Academy, and this is also 20 years in the making. You know, and we've touched upon it in the podcast, but there's a need in the world right now, especially with the psychedelic renaissance happening, for there to be a standardization of information out there. There is happening right now in the clinical side of it, but it isn't happening in the non-clinical side of it. And both sides will always exist. The Amazonian lineages and the psychedelic lineages, the ancestral lineages and the indigenous lineages are typically held in silos, very much like the science. And so you have right now this polarization of siloed information. And I think for this, you know, really rapidly expanding use of these visionary plants and really sacred plants, that there needs to be a standardization of information out there. And I'm in a unique position to be able to help that simply from having a Western scientific mind and also being immersed in these practices for the last 20 years. And so we're building the Blue Morpho Academy, and it's going to allow 4 levels of certification. There will be the sitter certification, coach, facilitator, and practitioner. And to be a sitter, it'll take a few months, and to be a coach, a little bit longer, like up to 6 months. And then your facilitator is about a year-long program to 2-year-long program, depending on what kind of specialty you would like to have. And then the practitioner is really like the equivalent of your full-blown master shaman or medico vegetalista, and that's going to be anywhere from around, you know, 3 to 4 years. And so these are going to be legitimate certification programs, and you're going to learn literally everything you need from the history, the basics, the legalities, about the plants themselves. We're going to start with 4 modalities. So we're going to have ayahuasca, wachuma, psilocybin, and cannabis, and then we're going to expand beyond those. But it's going to be an opportunity to get all the information you need. If you're a coach and you support others, or you're a counselor, this is a way to be able to get information about the experiences themselves so that you can relate to your clients or relate to the people that you're coaching and supporting if you haven't had these experiences yourself. If you're starting that out as a business, it's an opportunity also to learn about how to be able to develop this kind of business, and how to be able to hold retreats, and how to be able to support and facilitate for people and give them advice on the subjects. And so it really is like an A to Z, depending on how deep you want to get into it, to learn all about these visionary plants and how to be safe and professional with them. And you know, ultimately, if you would like to participate as a, you know, a career, you'll be able to get a boost as well in that.
Legit. I love everything you got going on, and I want to come down and check out the retreat center at some point. So maybe in 2023. Anything else you want to leave the audience with today?
I would just say that, you know, these things aren't as foreign as it seems to our culture. Right now, our culture has been going through a great prohibition of many different kinds of thought and experiences. But the plants that we're talking about are actually have been used for thousands and thousands of years, and they've been part of the shaping of our consciousness and our cultures, including the origins of the civilizations that our current civilizations have grown out of. And so, as we wake up to these concepts, there are safe, sane, professional healing ways of utilizing the plants. And just keep that in mind, and search and seek and search that out if you're interested in the experiences, so that we can ensure, you know, your safety, and we can ensure the positivity around the plants themselves. So that's kind of on a general note. And on a personal note, I would just say, you know, the greatest thing you could work on is self-love, like learning to love yourself in life itself. Like none of us got asked to be born in a way that we can really relate to. Like it happened, and it's a miraculous gift, I think. And we don't always get treated that way, and we weren't taught to treat life always as such a miraculous gift. And there are so many ways to be able to improve yourself, but they don't last unless you learn to really love yourself. And that's a love that comes from deep within your heart. And you had it when you were really little before life got however it got. And so the more we can awaken self love, the more that that becomes the seed for all positive transformation. And so I just think that that's such a great intention. And I would love you guys to practice it and share in that with me.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you. And where can people find you?
You can find me at bluemorphotours.com and on Facebook at Hamilton Souther, and on Instagram as Hamilton Souther as well.
Excellent. Thanks for joining us today. Appreciate it.
Oh, thank you so much, Mike. It's a pleasure.